Okay, Greg.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Symmes Township Zoning Commission. If everyone would join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag
Flag of the United States
States of America and
and
to
to
the
the republic which it
for which
stands,
it stands one
one
nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
and
justice
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone this evening. As I said earlier, this is going to be a new experience for me. So bear with us as we go through the process. Can I get a roll call? I don't know if Jana is, I think she's available by phone. Do we need a roll call?
You do, yeah.
Who does that? Should I?
Jan, typically.
It shows Jana's on here.
Yeah, she just needs to unmute herself.
You there, Jana?
Silence.
All right, let's see. I'll call the roll. Mr. Kessler, should I call the roll?
I would like that. Yes,
You're the chair of the meeting, correct?
I am.
Okay. Mr. Etter,
Here.
Mr. Singler,
Present.
Mr. Flynn,
Present.
Ms. Bucco,
Present.
Mr. Kessler.
Here. All
Right.
right. Can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I'll motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Brian, do you need to do a roll call again?
Nope. By acclamation is fine.
Can I get a motion for approval of the meeting minutes from January 15 of 2020?
But did everybody actually say yes to that?
The last one, yes.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
5-0. Okay.
Everyone approve the agenda. Moving on to the approval of the meeting minutes for January 15 of 2020.
I'll motion that we approve the meeting minutes of January 15, 2020.
One comment, I did see there's a number of typos in them, but there was one I thought maybe we should correct. On page 2, the second paragraph that begins with Mr. Motter. At the very bottom of that paragraph, it says the overall occupancy. I think it's supposed to be occupancy.
Yes.
Most of the others are minor, and I don't think they are confusing, so I won't go through the others.
Duly noted.
Mr. Flynn, do you modify your motion to include that change?
I modify my motion to accept, to approve the minutes of January 15, 2020 with the one change as noted by Ms. Bucco.
I'll second it.
Second the motion.
Very well. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And so be it, it passes. Moving on to the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. First on the agenda is Symmes case number 3-79, Governor's Hill FIS signs. To review an amended application for a final development plan to allow the addition of a building mounted sign on a second facade of the building where no building mounted signage is currently permitted. The subject property is owned by New York Life Insurance Company and is located at 8500 Governor's Hill Drive on the corner of Governor's Hill Drive and Chapel Square intersections. Brian, do you want to comment?
Sure, I'm gonna share my screen so we can see this. The case is a final development plan modification for 8500 Governor's Hill Drive. This is part of 1979 zone change that allowed for the construction of this office complex. This is the 8500 Governor's Hill building right here. Portion of it is zone double E and portions of it is zone double O, but it was all built as an office building. Existing parking, the entrance to the parking lot from Governor's Hill Drive here. These are kind of sister buildings that share a parking garage located in between. That's here. Everybody's probably familiar with this property. The sign that's being requested for the final development plan modification would be on a second facade where no signage is permitted because it doesn't face a public street, and that would be this facade here. We'll get into that a little bit further down. Some pictures of the current building. You can see there's a sign over the entrance and a sign on the penthouse mechanical room. There's also a freestanding sign. All of these are permitted by the zoning code. All three of the two building signs and this sign are permitted by the zoning code. And then this is kind of between the garage and the building is this entrance where they're proposing the additional sign. So here's the building. This faces out towards the street. This has the penthouse sign and the entrance sign that are permitted. This would be the sign that they're proposing for the modification. And then just some graphics. This is the freestanding sign here. Would be smaller than the current freestanding sign. This is the sign they're proposing for over the entrance, the main entrance, which is also smaller than the existing sign. And then they're replacing the top building sign here, also slightly smaller than what's there currently. And then they're proposing this sign here, which would be 20.4 square feet in size on the glass area over the employee entrance to the side of the building. So that is this is the subject of the FDP modification. We require a variance to the zoning code. No signage is allowed on this facade. The staff report finds that the requested variance would have very little impact on anybody. You can't see it from the street. The garage blocks it from the adjacent office building. This really is, again, an employee entrance sign that would only be seen really by anybody coming out of the parking garage, which I believe is employees only. Generally, the size of all the signs are getting smaller, so there'd be less signage on the site than there is currently. So staff has no issue with this sign, and be happy to answer any questions.
Brian, I have a question. I don't, in light of the smaller signage, et cetera, I don't think it's the square footage. Obviously, if it faces a parking garage, nobody else other than employees are going to see it. But my concern is, are we setting a precedent for other applicants that we don't want to set?
Sure, that's always a concern, yes.
Okay.
What kind of sign is it, Brian?
That's a good question. It's mounted on the glass. I'm not sure if it's a kind of a sticker or an actual channel letter. Let's see. It looks like channel letters is what it says on the graphic here. Brushed aluminum letters mounted to existing glass windows.
Are they lit?
I don't believe so. There's no indication that they're lit. I don't know how they would light them being mounted on the glass like they are.
I don't know how you put channel letters on the glass.
Yeah, I don't know that they're channel letters either. They might just be stuck to the glass in some way.
Just like a graphic is what you're thinking.
Right.
We can ask the applicant.
Brian, are you aware of any other buildings in the area where we currently allow signs such as this that's not currently permissible?
I'm sure that there are some. I don't recall any off the top of my head.
Okay. Any other questions for Brian?
I have none.
All right. We'd like to hear from the applicant now. If you could state your name and provide us with an address as well, please.
I believe that is Andrea Blinkhorn. I believe I just unmuted her. I'm not sure if I can add her. Let's see, promoted her to panelist. So let me stop the sharing of the screen and see if we have, right. Yes, Andrea Blinkhorn.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you. Hi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all of your consideration. As you and Brian have discussed, this sign is over the employee entrance. As you know, this is the former WorldPay headquarters and now a very strategic location for FIS, and is a location where we do have C-suite executives working. And so for us, it's an important indicator for when our employees are walking in that they feel that, you know, they are recognizing where they are going to work in normal times. Obviously, with COVID, folks aren't in the office today. But we think that it's important for what this site represents for the company at large and the important work that we're doing in normal times, but especially with the times of COVID currently, that we are continuing to facilitate billions of transactions as a critical infrastructure provider for the country, and very committed to our employees and to Symmes Township, and having a good partnership with yourselves in the state. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Who are you with, Andrea?
I am on the government relations team with FIS.
And is that the company that merged with the company in not Loveland, in London or England?
Yes. So just under a year ago, WorldPay merged with FIS, and FIS headquarters is in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, my bad.
Is there anybody here with you?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
What is the sign what is the material of the sign that you're proposing over the employee entrance?
My understanding is it's that brushed aluminum. I think it's going to be the same material that's also on the other side of the building that faces the parking lot, so that it'll be the same type of material, but I don't unfortunately have further details on that.
Okay.
We're happy, we can definitely follow up.
With this entrance, would anyone be allowed to go in there or just employees? Is there a secured entrance that would not allow anyone else to go beyond the door?
Both of our entrances are secure, so even if you enter from the front of the building, there is a security desk that you have to check in regardless. And so either side, you have to have a badge to swipe in.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Ms. Blinken?
No?
Nope.
Is there anyone else present on this meeting on Zoom that would like to comment at all with respect to the proposed signage?
So this is where I'm going to get into a discussion possibly with Drew.
Yeah, so what you're looking for is under more, it says change role to attendee.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I see more.
On the name.
Well,
Oh, on the right side.
Yeah.
Stephen Wolf has his hand up.
He has his hand up.
Okay. All right, and so anybody that wants to speak can put their hand up.
Yes.
And then we'll add him as a panelist. Okay. All right, Mr. Wolf, I believe that the chair has given you the floor.
Yes, I have. I wish I knew how to, but you have the floor.
He's on mute.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Mr.
Mr.
Wolf.
Wolf,
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I can't. As a courtesy to us, could you identify yourself and provide us with an address?
Sure. My name is Stephen Wolf. I live at 11740 Symmes Valley Drive. My mailing address is Loveland.
Okay. What would you like to comment on?
Well, I was just listening to this and I don't really have any, but you know, nobody knows what the sign's made out of. I don't even know how you can make a decision. You don't even know what the sign is. Nobody knows. She doesn't know. People don't know. Nobody knows. A lot of assumptions. Nobody knows. Sign up like what? Right? So you're going to set a precedent. If you agree, you set a precedent. You don't even know what you're setting a precedent for. Just saying.
So what the plans actually say is brushed aluminum letters mounted to existing glass windows.
There you go. So just my observation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else out there in the digital world that would like to provide any additional comments? All right, that will close the public portion with respect to this case number. Any discussion among panel in favor of, for, or against, or would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right,
I motion that we recommend a modification to the final development plan for case Symmes 3-79, Town Properties, Inc., parentheses, Governor's Hill, close parentheses, dash 8500 Governor's Hill Drive, to add an additional 20.4 square foot wall sign on the western facade of the 8500 Governor's Hill Drive building.
I'll second the motion.
Seconded by,
Greg.
yes, sir. Okay. Is Jana here? Okay, I'll call.
Brian, are you
Nick?
an official recorder now?
I believe I am.
You get charged more?
No, same fee. All right, would you like me to call the roll, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Mr. Etter,
Yes.
Mr. Singler,
Yes.
Mr. Flynn,
Yes.
Ms. Bucco. Ms. Bucco, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No.
Mr. Kessler.
No.
Okay, motion passes 3-2.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blinkhorn. Moving on to the second item of business. Symmes Township case number 2020-01 regarding text amendments, specifically review text amendments to the zoning resolution to amend, and various sections are identified. I don't know if I need to go through and identify each one of those.
No, that's what we're getting ready to do.
Brian, before you get started, if you could provide some insight, maybe you plan on doing so anyway, as far as the process and the procedure on why this is before us and how it plays out based on what we do.
Sure. Okay. So this is a zone change. It's a text amendment. It is case Symmes 2020-01. As a text amendment, the procedures for amending the text of a zoning resolution require the same procedures as it would be for any other zone change. The procedures laid out by the Ohio Revised Code include sending the request to the Regional Planning Commission for a consideration, having a zoning commission public hearing, and final consideration for approval or denial or modification by the Symmes Township trustees. Text amendments or any other zone change that that would be initiated by the township can either be initiated through a motion of the zoning commission or by resolution of the board of trustees. So in this case, township administration put together a list of amendments, presented them to the board of trustees. The board of trustees passed a resolution to initiate the text amendment process. Then following that, it will follow the process I outlined before. It went to the Regional Planning Commission. It is here before the Zoning Commission, and it will go before the Board of Trustees for final consideration. The Regional Planning Commission at their meeting on July 2nd heard the staff report and recommended approval of the changes with modifications to address the concerns raised in the staff report. And so I'll go through the staff report and then I'll answer any questions that you might have about the amendments. So generally, the Regional Planning Commission staff found that the proposed amendments were positive, would be a positive change and result in an improved set of regulations for Symmes Township. There were some issues that were identified in the staff report with some of the specifics of the changes. Those begin on page 2 of the report. The first one relating to the proposal to require sidewalks on both sides of all streets in accordance with the Hamilton County Engineer standards. For all lots platted in a subdivision, minor subdivision, or any residential or commercial property along any major roadway or thoroughfare that has been identified for sidewalks according to the adopted sidewalk plan for Symmes Township. The issue that was identified was the language is unclear as to whether or not the zoning code would now require sidewalks on both sides of all subdivision streets within a subdivision. And additionally, on minor subdivisions where when minor subdivisions are approved, there are no buildings being constructed. And generally the people who are approving lot splits, at least half of them are residents who are trying to split off a lot to sell possibly to their daughter or to their neighbor in the future or something along those lines. Requiring sidewalks at that point would not be possible, or it would be very prohibitive to the person who owned the property who would be splitting the lot. In addition, the Regional Planning Commission has authority over sidewalk installation inside of subdivisions. Requiring it in the zoning resolution would usurp their authority to consider whether or not sidewalks should be placed on both sides or any side of a street within a subdivision, a major subdivision. Where that would come into play would be situations where sidewalks aren't desirable on one side of the street, or there's no reason to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. There are numerous instances where a developer has made the argument that they don't need sidewalks on both sides of the street, and the township has supported that, and the Regional Planning Commission has wanted to do that. If there was a requirement for it in the zoning resolution, that wouldn't be possible. Every builder would have to build sidewalks on both sides of the street, whether it was desirable or not. I think, in speaking with Kim Lipinski, the administrator, I believe the intent of this was to require sidewalks on major streets where townships are considering building sidewalks so that they don't have to pay for all the sections of sidewalk when there are developments going in that could install their section of the sidewalk. And I think there's probably some modified language that could address the concerns in the staff report, which I'll get into later if you'd like. But for now, I'm going to go on with the rest of the staff report. The second issue that we raised was the inclusion of property maintenance standards into the zoning code. This is not something that is typically included in zoning. Typically, property maintenance standards are included in a separate code of property maintenance standards, a property maintenance code by itself as a standalone document. The reason for that is that it's much easier to administer a property maintenance code if it's in its own document where it has its own procedures, its own penalties, its own enforcement, and it has clear definitions of what constitutes all of the things that are required in the property maintenance code. The language that's shown for inclusion in the zoning resolution is very subjective. There are no definitions of any of the stuff that's being included, including peeling paint and good condition. Language such as this would put it on our zoning inspector to make a subjective determination of what constitutes good condition or what constitutes peeling paint, how much peeling paint is constituting peeling paint enough to use the zoning resolution enforcement arm to try and get somebody to paint something. And I'm trying to imagine how we would defend that in housing court if we were to actually take some kind of action against a private property owner for not painting their porch or anything else. The only section in here that would be easily enforceable would be fences being required to be maintained in a 90-degree angle in good condition because of the fact that there's a very specific determination of what that includes. Being 90 degrees, it has to be straight up and down. I think we could probably enforce that. The rest of the stuff that's in here as far as grass cutting and property maintenance, trash, debris, repairing driveways, those things are not things that should be included in the zoning resolution, especially not without any kind of procedure for relief of those things other than going to the Board of Zoning Appeals and proving a hardship or stating your case in front of housing court. I think these things should be standalone property maintenance issues with the exception of the fence. So again, I've got language suggested for that I'll get into later. The third thing that was identified, and this is on page 3 of the staff report, this is the first bullet on page 3, it's the second bullet down from the top. Increasing the setbacks from the property lines for compost bins to 5 feet. There are a number of instances where something like that is being proposed, and you can see them in the individual text that goes into every single residential district where compost bins are discussed. Currently, there's a difference in some of the accessory structures where some of them are allowed to be 3 feet and some of them are allowed to be 5 feet. This kind of cleans that up and makes the consistent 5 foot for everything. So we were totally in support of that. The next bullet, the last bullet on page 3, relates to driveways and requirement that the driveways be set back from the property line to meet the side yard setback distance. Staff does not support that. Just because of the fact that it would create numerous non-conforming driveways in the township. Side entry garages are generally viewed as a valuable thing or a desirable thing for houses to have. It'd be very difficult to do a side entry garage without being able to put the driveway into the side yard setback. So you'd be discouraging that type of use. In addition, most people want people to keep all of their stuff in the backyard if possible, out of the front yard. And a lot of people use driveways around the side of their garage to get to their backyard to do that. Without being able to pave a driveway into the side yard setback, you probably wouldn't be able to create a driveway around the side of most of the houses in the township. So people would be driving or moving things across the grass instead of across a paved surface. And honestly, a lot of the driveways out there would become non-conforming. The portion of this that requires the driveways to be paved with, I think it probably meant to say asphalt or cement pavement, would be good. That clarifies that pavement is required and not gravel. So we support that entirely. Let's see, I think those are the main ones. The rest of them, I believe we are in support of. Adding camper and RV to the list of prohibitions for parking in residential districts is desirable. It's campers and RVs aren't specifically called out, but they're intended to be restricted as trailers. But adding camper and RVs, since a lot of RVs now are driven, they're not necessarily always trailers now, is a positive thing. The one issue that we have with that is that we are extending zoning into the right of way, where it says that they can't be parked on any public street. Typically, zoning hasn't been used to enforce anything within the right of way. I can't say that there's a regulation in state law anywhere that says that zoning doesn't apply to the right of way. And I've said this to a number of people, including Kim, when I talked to her about this, and several lawyers that I know. Everybody's heard that zoning doesn't apply to the right of way, but nobody can say where it actually says that anywhere, where there's any law that says that it doesn't apply to the right of way. Generally, most places that I've talked to, most other zoning administrators in other jurisdictions feel the same way in Ohio, that zoning doesn't apply to the right of way. My guess is there was some legal standard or some law case that was decided in the past that everybody's forgotten. Everybody remembers the lesson, but they don't remember the book. I can't say for sure. I've asked our county prosecutor that for clarification in the county zoning jurisdiction, and I never got a response back. So I'm pointing it out because I believe that it's legally questionable, but I can't say why for sure. So that's the only issue that I had with that. And then I don't believe that there's any other issues. There were several things else. There were several other things pointed out in the staff report. None of them are serious. The final bullet point related to fences being set back 5 feet from all fire hydrants and public utilities. Well, the plans examiners don't have all of the public utility layers available to them at all times, and they're not necessarily the most accurate layers, at least not the ones that we're allowed to view. So that'll be a thing that if it gets included in the zoning code, we'll just have to tell people you're not allowed to put your fence within 5 feet of a fire hydrant or any utility, and then we'll have to trust them, and in the field they will keep the fences and accessory structures away from the fire hydrants 5 feet. But that's the end of the staff report. That's all I have. Like I said, I have some suggestions for changes to the language that would address the staff's concerns. We can get into them if you'd like, but at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Brian, if we approve or deny this, is it just a recommendation to the board, or
Yes.
they have final say?
Yes, that's correct. They're
And
asking you for your recommendation. That's correct.
I'm confused because how did all this other stuff get added? Because all we talked about at one time were sidewalks, and now there's all this other stuff out of nowhere.
So in speaking with Kim, I believe that these are other issues that come up frequently or have come up repeatedly at the township trustees level. These are things that the township administration gets called on regularly. For instance, I know that the fence is falling over is a point of contention. Typically, that's an issue between neighbors, but they apparently contact the township often to complain about their neighbors' fences. Driveway drainage, I think, was the point of the setback for the driveway, is that people have driveways that the stormwater drains onto their neighbor's property and they call the township and want them to do something. And things like that. I think these are all attempts to address concerns that the township regularly hears from residents.
But to your earlier point, why is this zoning?
Like I said, I think I suggest that some of these things shouldn't be. But that's my suggestion as a professional planner. Again, they're asking you for a recommendation. The Board of Trustees will make the final decision.
And it doesn't matter what we recommend?
No, they can change it.
Okay.
I mean, your recommendation, your official recommendation, not that it doesn't matter. It's, they're asking their zoning commission for their recommendation on their zoning changes. So.
And then if we go to the sidewalk statement, it says the township is proposing to require sidewalks on both sides of all streets in accordance with Hamilton County engineer standards for all lots platted in a subdivision. What is the definition of platted? Does that mean every single house that's platted therefore falls underneath this?
Yeah, so that would be every house in a subdivision. So if you have a 30-lot subdivision, all 30 lots would eventually be platted because they're part of the subdivision.
No, but the houses that we all live in right now are considered platted. So therefore, the definition would be every house that's currently in the subdivision.
Well, two things. I think that's why it says at the end of that, from the point of adoption of this resolution forward or something like that. And additionally, every house that's out there currently would be grandfathered. There's no retroactive requirement that everybody build a sidewalk in the township.
But then, so help me understand this then. So you can't go backwards, yet if there's a sidewalk plan and say someone's property's on that plan and they live there, are they required to put a sidewalk in then?
No, they would only be required to put the sidewalk in at the time of construction, I believe.
But it's not clear, I guess, is my concern. This isn't clearly written because I'm confused. And I don't like ambiguity in the zoning ever because someone could turn it around against somebody. I don't think that's fair. I think that's what you're saying.
Correct.
Indirectly.
Yes.
So who wrote this then?
I believe Kim Lepensi wrote it.
Is she an attorney?
She's the township administrator.
Is she an attorney?
I don't believe so. I know that the township's attorney did review these and signed off on these amendments.
Brian, I have a couple of questions. I think I'm probably as confused as Todd is or was. I think I was surprised to see all these other issues brought in, but you've clarified where they came from. I believe I was out of town when the initial sidewalk issue came up about 18 months ago, and I'm not sure I've ever really caught up regarding this. It appears to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the document on the back is reflective of what was proposed and does not reflect any of the staff's comments. Is that correct? To the extent staff is saying take it out or modify it or whatever, none of that is in this proposed amendment. Is that correct?
Well, so I didn't speak to Kim when she was preparing these text amendments, and I believe that she was aware of the discussions that were had where I made my feelings known to the zoning commission, where the zoning commission was considering initiating the text amendments, and I made my my findings clear. But I'm not sure that that the administrator had those comments when she wrote these amendments, and I did speak to her, and I believe that her idea with these amendments was that there's a process and there's a reason for the process, and during the process, amendments can be made before they're adopted by the trustees. I didn't get the impression that she would be opposed to making changes to address the concerns that were raised in the staff report, and I think I have some language that gets to the to kind of the real intent that she laid out to me for each of the amendments.
Well, as I read staff's comments, to be honest with you, I agree with, I think, all of them. And certainly it doesn't appear any of them are reflected in the document. And to try and figure out how we would modify this in this meeting is probably a little bit challenging. I mean, it seems to me that someone needs to go back and take these into consideration if we're looking for a thumbs up or thumbs down on this thing, or some reasonable amount of proposed changes.
I do have a reasonable amount of proposed changes.
Okay, because it looks like a hot mess to me right now.
Well, it's not as hard. It's not as bad as it's not bad at all, really. Like I said, we agree with most of the staff, agrees with most of the things that were included in the amendments initiated by the trustees. It's just some of the main issues, I believe, went a little bit too far into things that we can't enforce or can't reasonably enforce through zoning. And I've identified those things to be removed, and I can probably fairly easily explain the suggested changes to the board, and I think that we can all get it. But
Brian, if I may, I sort of,
we can get into that.
I understand where you're going with this, but sort of in line with what Cynthia said, is I prefer to have something concrete in front of me to approve or deny, as opposed to language with suggestions and ambiguities that we then have a motion to approve or deny, and then that subsequently goes to the Board of Trustees for approval. Is that how that works?
Correct. Yes, it would. I mean, you can make the changes and they would be reflected in your recommendation to the trustees, and it would move forward to them. That's correct.
And then
you also have the authority to continue the meeting.
Yeah, I agree with Greg in that I would like to see a document that has these proposed changes in it, so I know what it is I'm approving or recommending or not recommending.
I mean, ultimately,
Right.
the Board of Trustees would vote up or down on this, correct?
Yeah.
Well, you could vote to approve it with changes.
But to go through, because we haven't opened this up to the public yet, and we will. But my concern is the hot button issues here are going to be sidewalks and probably driveway. And to the extent people want to comment on that, there's suggestions here, but nothing concrete for them to have their voices heard, I guess. I'm just looking for definitive language.
Well, possibly if you open it up to the public, we get everybody's concerns and see if there's anything else other than what was raised in the staff report that the commission feels like would change. And then I can explain the changes to the commission, and you can decide whether you want to act on it or continue the meeting until I can discuss that with Kim and put it in writing.
Okay.
Do we have to vote tonight?
No, you have the authority to continue the hearing if you don't feel like you have enough information to act.
Okay.
So I have a question. So related to the driveways, so what I'll call groomed gravel driveways that they use small pea gravel. Is this text amendment then would disallow that?
It's disallowed elsewhere in the zoning resolution. This would just clarify that it's definitely disallowed, but it is currently disallowed, and this would continue disallowing that. You're not allowed to use gravel as a driveway material currently.
Why?
I believe, and this is almost universally true in every non-rural zoning resolution, that gravel gets tracked out onto the street generally. So some places ban it altogether. Some places ban it for the first 50 feet from the road, 100 feet from the road. There's several numbers that people come up with, but the point is, if you have a gravel driveway, you're going to track it out into the road.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's done all the time in Indian Hill, but we're not Indian Hill. I get it.
You probably have somebody to come clean their driveway every time they leave too.
It's quite possible. And then with respect to things like tree houses and that type of thing, I just want to make clear, all HOAs would really have precedent over this as well, right?
Zoning is the minimum that can be enforced by the township. So the township zoning inspector, and then by contract through the county, we can enforce everything in the zoning resolution. HOA requirements can be much more strict than the zoning code, and then it's on them to enforce their own rules. But yes, that's correct. If they wanted to have all compost bins 20 feet away or ban them altogether from their subdivision, and it's like that in their HOA documents and in the deeds and restrictions that the people sign when they buy the property, yes, they would still be able to do that. This would not change that in any way.
And
So to the extent someone has a place that doesn't currently comply, they must make it conforming, or is it grandfathered in?
It's grandfathered. It'd be grandfathered.
Any other questions for Brian before we open it up to the public?
I do. Where
Go ahead.
where do the maintenance standards currently reside, or do they not reside at all?
They don't reside at all. That's the point. The township's gone through a process of potentially coming up with and reviewing a property maintenance code. At some point, I believe they decided to try and put them into the zoning resolution. I don't think there's a law that says you can't do it, but I'm not real familiar with it because I've never seen another zoning jurisdiction include these type of property maintenance requirements into their zoning code. So I can't say that you can't do it. All I can say is that if it makes it into the zoning code with its current language, and then our zoning inspector is asked to enforce painting of a porch next to a person's house that complains, I don't know how we get that done. I don't know how we uphold that in housing court. We don't have enough information included in the current amendments to back that determination in front of a judge. I don't believe.
How do other townships handle it?
They adopt a property maintenance code, standalone.
And then who enforces that? The township?
They hire a property maintenance inspector generally.
so at this point, I guess, Greg, you're going to open it up.
I am.
Have discussion with the public, get their
Correct.
their views on it. And then we're going to come back, and then Brian is going to give us his recommended revisions to this code. And then we can decide from there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So Greg, since I'm technically part of, I guess, the public now as opposed to the commission, if if I can sneak in here as
Sure.
the first public participant. So Brian, I had reviewed these amendments in detail, and I just had several questions that I had that I'd like addressed.
Sure.
First off, in regard to the sidewalk issue, in the first bullet, it talks about the adopted sidewalk plan, and that's a lowercase adopted sidewalk plan. Is there a capitalized adopted sidewalk plan?
I don't think it would matter.
Okay, well, I think it does matter, because if there's an official sidewalk plan, that would be capitalized versus, a generic idea of having a plan would be lowercase.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the official title of the sidewalk plan is.
I guess my question is there a sidewalk plan?
There is, I believe, yes.
Okay. And
Generic in zoning codes like this, in case, someday somebody changes the name of the sidewalk plan, then you got to change the zoning text as well.
mhm.
Adopted sidewalk plan, if you can, as the administrator of this code, if it says adopted sidewalk plan and the township says, here's our adopted sidewalk plan, no matter what it's called, it's going to be what we go with.
Okay, good. In the findings section, it talks about the desirability of sidewalks and, whether the township wanted to consider the desirability of sidewalks on a case-by-case basis. I'm not really sure a scenario where sidewalks would not be desirable. Do you have an example of that?
Sure, where one side of the street doesn't include houses, for example, or the preservation of property in a community unit plan makes it so the developer doesn't want to get into that area with sidewalks. There are very short cul-de-sacs where sidewalks would serve a limited purpose. I don't know. There's lots of arguments. They're very rarely compelling, but there are some instances where the planning commission can wholesale waive sidewalks on one side of the street for a good reason, and it doesn't require each individual builder to come in and get a variance for each individual lot. that way. And I think the idea with the sidewalks was to get sidewalks on the major road so that the township doesn't have to build
Right.
sidewalks on Humphrey Road. If there's a house that's going to be built on Humphrey, they can put in their stretch of sidewalk at their own expense. And I think that's the kind of the focus of it.
Okay. So, and then the last point in the findings, it talks about the requirement that that this activity would have to be enforced at the zoning certificate stage. Is that an issue if it were enforced at the zoning certificate stage?
Well, I think I don't recall what I was talking about there exactly. I believe that it's just that the subdivision plan can show whatever it wants, but at the zoning certificate, you're going to have to show sidewalks. So the planning commission still have the authority to approve sidewalk plans that don't show sidewalks necessarily. But at some point in time, the sidewalks are going to have to be done. It was kind of backing up the point that the current process, the township or the planning commission asks the township for a recommendation on whether they want sidewalks. If the township says they want sidewalks, the planning commission 99% of the time upholds that request. But if there's a situation where nobody wants the sidewalk, the planning commission can waive it, and then nobody has to go get variances.
Okay. Moving on to the property maintenance issue. I like the idea of having enforcement authority for property maintenance, but I agree with you that I think there's a lot of vague terms, and that just sets us up for potential litigation. And as you said, the trustees had a process already that they were undertaking with a property maintenance code, which for whatever reason was disbanded. And I think that should really be revisited. And further that, when we talked about the HOAs, I mean, most of the subdivisions are going to have HOAs, which are going to have their own enforcement capabilities. So, I think that perhaps we should limit, any concern to properties that are not otherwise governed by an HOA, and that that the real issue here is that property owners should not be able to create a nuisance and therefore not damage the property value of their neighbors. And you talked about in this that we really can't maintain the highest property value and enhance quality of life, but I think we can enforce when somebody's essentially creating a harm through their action or inaction.
But see, that's the problem is how do we define what harm to the neighbor is? Those kind of terms are generally not something that I would suggest you include in the zoning code. If it's not 10 feet, if it's a reasonable distance back, then who comes up with what reasonable is? That's why we say 10 feet and not a reasonable distance. And there's not a way to put most of these things into clear terms. There's
Right.
just not, unless we get extremely specific, like where my zoning inspectors can be out there with a ruler measuring the length of grass because we say that 6 inches is too long. I mean, it's like I said, it's something that typically goes into a property maintenance code, and those things are called a code because they're a code book length of regulations. And the reason for that is that you have to be able to defend all of those things, and you have to include definitions and be very specific as to what constitutes a violation of your property maintenance requirements. But this says a lot of the things that a preamble to a property maintenance code would say. It just doesn't have any of the specific details as to what constitutes each and every one of these violations.
And that's where I think that maybe somebody like yourself who has experience from other municipalities and townships may be able to provide some guidance. Again, I think really the best situation.
Well, like I said, those are things that come into zoning codes. I've never seen one. I don't have.
I was going to just say that too, is that I think it would be much better as a standalone document of property maintenance code. And if the trustees want to submit a property maintenance code, that's their prerogative. But this kind of feels like it's being dumped in our lap as the zoning commission when it's really something that belongs in their jurisdiction. Moving on to the driveway issue, I had a concern or a question about brick driveways, and are those allowed?
So generally, that's why there's, it generally doesn't say asphalt or concrete. It says something like asphaltic binder, pavement, cement, or other non-dustless solid surfaces or something like that.
Mhm.
This doesn't say that. I'm not sure if it says it elsewhere in the code. Like I said, I know it prevents gravel elsewhere in the code, but yeah, I see the point.
Yeah, and kind of on the pea gravel issue, what about bound pea gravel, where it's bound in some kind of solid surface?
Usually cement.
Or some kind of polymer of some kind, epoxy.
Right, that's where the non-dustless surface would come
Right.
in and then past cement.
Right. And then my last, no, it's not my last question. Sorry. In regard to the issues with the campers and the RVs, this doesn't affect a camper or an RV or a boat or anything like that being stored or stationed on a personal driveway, does it?
Yes,
It does.
it does.
So to be clear, so a homeowner couldn't store a camper, an RV, a boat, or any of these other items, trailers on their driveway.
Correct.
And is that for what, overnight, for a protracted period, or how are we defining that?
So that's a good question. We don't. We added an amendment to the county code a while ago that said 48 hours or 24 hours, one or the other. I can't remember. Just to clarify that. Typically, it's something that the zoning inspector works out with the owner. Our zoning inspectors have been doing it for years. Like I said, we added it to the county's code, but prior to that, it was typically you can't store it out there. If you're clearly washing it or loading it or getting ready to go on vacation, our zoning inspector wasn't going to cite you for it, because by the time the citation, the notice of violation was up, it would be gone. So it's really intended for the people that park them and store them year round in their driveway. That's prohibited in the township, has been for a number of years. And this just clarifies that driving RVs are the same as trailer RVs. It's essentially what it does.
Okay. And I guess my last comment is in regard to the setback for the fire hydrants and public utilities. I think we need to make a distinction between fire hydrants and public utilities. I mean, fire hydrants have a safety issue associated with it. I'm not sure that the utilities are as much a safety as it is a potentially, I guess, an inconvenience to utility workers who may need to access their utility services. So I think that we should really differentiate that, and kind of along the same line, I'm sure that there are utility poles that traverse people's backyards, somewhere in the township, and those people may want to have fences and in their backyards. So how are we addressing that?
Right. Yes. It's my concern. Fire hydrants, obviously everybody can see a fire hydrant and they know where they are when they're getting ready to put their fence up.
Right.
Typically, nobody knows where the rest of the utilities are. They wouldn't be able to tell anyway.
Right.
And like I said, we wouldn't be able to tell them for sure where they are either.
All right. That's all I had. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Jeff. Is there anyone else from the public? I see a couple hands up. Brian, if you want to help me as far as getting these people.
Sure. Stephen Wolf is at the top of the list. We heard from him on the previous case. I will promote him to a panelist now, and he'll have an opportunity to speak about this.
Mr. Wolf?
Let's see. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Stephen Wolf, 11740 Symmes Valley Drive, Loveland, Ohio. So I'm curious. So Brian, are you a consultant or a township employee, or what's your role here?
I'm the Hamilton County Zoning Administrator. I administer the zoning code for Symmes Township through a contract with the Symmes Township trustees, but I work for the government. I work for Hamilton County Commissioners.
Okay. Do you live in Symmes Township?
No.
Okay, I assume the rest of you are Symmes Township residents?
The rest of everybody
Yes.
here is a member of the Symmes Township Zoning Commission. And you're required to be a resident of Symmes Township to be on that commission. It's a
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So first, I'd like to say, you know, a little background on the property maintenance code. So when this came around last year, a number of residents were quite concerned. And a number of us got together, actually hundreds of us, and went to the Board of Trustees and complained a lot. Because what it turned out was there was no problem. And we were trying to pass a property maintenance code that could potentially cost the residents a bunch of money and cause a lot of inconvenience when there wasn't any problem in the township. Most people take care of their property. There are very few complaints, and there's really not a problem. And so the township residents who moved to the township because we like smaller government, we like less rules and regulations. A lot of us don't live in a subdivision with an HOA because we don't want to be in an HOA. You know, if you want to do that, you can move in a place with an HOA. But for those of us who don't want that, it's great to be able to live in a place without an HOA and have, you know, the township rules apply. Personally, I didn't want to live in a place with an HOA, and I've lived in the township for over 30 years. And I made my buying decision based on the fact that what the township rules were 30 years ago. I can't, you know, I'm just not going to pick up and move because, you know, the rules change tomorrow, right? I own my home. I lived here. It's my home. And I made a lot of decisions based on the township rules. And so the property maintenance code came out, and many people were very upset. And that's why the trustees withdrew it. And now it seems the trustees are trying to do an end run on the citizens by getting you guys involved and getting you to approve the things that the citizens were up in arms about. And personally, my heartburn is I'm an RV owner, and I spent thousands of dollars on an RV so I could enjoy it in my retirement because I've lived here 30 years. I'm ready to retire. And now folks, consultants, others who don't live here are coming and saying, hey, you can't enjoy your RV the way you thought you could. We're going to tell you, and we're going to tell you how you're going to spend your money and how you're going to maintain your house, because nobody's done any financial impact of what the property maintenance code is that I've seen. What's it going to cost the citizens? I mean, this gravel driveway is a prime example. If I have a big, long yard and I need a big, long driveway, a gravel driveway is a lot cheaper than a paved one. And so, you know, the choice would be no driveway or spend $10,000. I mean, you know, I don't know I think, you know, it's great if everybody's rich, you know, but guess what? Not everybody's rich.
Well,
And
can I speak to this briefly?
a lot of these ideas, excuse me? A lot of these
Briefly, I
ideas
just wanna-
about beautiful. I'm sorry.
So the driveway requirement to be paved
Yeah.
and the prohibition of RVs in the front yard are currently in the zoning resolution.
Yeah, I don't park my RV in the front yard, but I do park it on the street because I need access to it to load it and unload it and so on and so forth. And it really just rubs me the wrong way. And I feel sorry for you guys because you've been put in the middle by the trustees. They're putting you up to this. And there's a lot of people very upset because they've reached out to me. A lot of citizens very upset about the way this is going down. And I just don't get it why we're jumping through hoops to fix problems that don't exist in the township, spend more money. Oh, we're going to hire a property maintenance inspector. Who's going to pay for that? We are. Who's going to pay for all this stuff? We're going to pay for it.
Mr. Wolf, just a quick question. With respect to your RV, when you park it on the street, how long is it usually there?
Few days. you know, I got to load it. I have to unload it. I have to turn on the refrigerator to get it cold.
Right.
You know, it takes about a day for that. You know, maybe I want to wash it. Maybe I want to, you know, use some tools or something. I don't store it there, but you know, I have a storage lot. I pay for that. Or if I need to keep it longer and the ground is dry, I can put it in my backyard. You know, and drive it over the grass and put it in the backyard. But I mean, guys, I mean, you know, you're going to cause me hardship. And I have a couple neighbors that, you know, they put their trailers in their driveway to load and unload and clean and stuff. I mean, why are you trying to make it hard for us? What do we do, right? We're not bothering anybody. And so that's kind of how I feel we felt about the property maintenance code. We're not bothering anybody. We're not causing any problem. There is no problem. And so why are we jumping through hoops and potentially increasing the cost to the township when there is no problem? Do we have a couple folks who don't keep their yards great? Yeah, I got one 2 doors down. He was there when I moved in. You know, it's just, you know, but it's his property. It's not my job to tell him how to live. You know, leave the people alone. Leave us. We don't want to be ruled. You know, I'm not looking for somebody to come rule me. Really, I'm a grown up. I can handle my own self. You know, and that's kind of what it feels like. You know, if I want to live in Landon, I would have moved to Landon. So that's really, you know, what I have to say. I feel sorry the trustees are putting you in the middle here because I think it's unfair and they don't really give you the background to tell you how strong the citizen opposition was to the property maintenance code and a lot of these other changes they plopped in your lap out of nowhere because I heard you say that. So you're as surprised as we are. You know, because I saw this and I went, what? Because the trustees told us this was a dead issue. It's over. We're done. We're not bringing up the property maintenance code. You can go look at the recording. And here we are again. So that's what I have to say.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who is up next, Brian?
Give me 1 second. While I'm trying to figure this out, I will say that this isn't a backdoor way to go through this process. The Symmes Township trustees had the authority to adopt a property maintenance code. They also had the authority to initiate a text amendment. This is the required process. It wasn't dropped in your lap necessarily. They initiated a text amendment and now it's following what the Ohio Revised Code says is the process for zone changes. So this is a very public meeting, obviously. Concerned citizens have heard about it. The trustees are going to make a decision on it again. So it's going to be before them to make it. Everybody will be able to make their arguments to the trustees before anything can happen to the zoning code. So I just wanted to clarify, this isn't kind of a backdoor way around any kind of process. The trustees would have had to do it with the property maintenance or zoning code. They're both going to require trustee action. So the next question that I had, sorry, go ahead.
Quick question. With respect to what goes to the trustees next, will that be definitive language or will it be more suggestions?
Well, the trustees can modify what you say. So they'll get the original language that they initiated. They'll see the staff report and they'll see your recommendation. So they'll have the concerns raised in the staff report. And if the zoning commission decides to make any changes to their recommendation, they'll have those as well. They'll be able to see both the original and the suggestions of the zoning commission.
And then whatever changes they make, they vote on and that's the end of it?
Yes. I mean, it's subject to referendum and it's appealable to court, but yes, they're the final decision-making body pending an appeal or referendum.
Got it.
Okay, so Michael Howell was the next on the list that had his hand raised to talk. So
Mr. Howell, you would state your name and address, please.
We'll give him a second to get in here, and I believe I have to unmute him when he does. Let's see. There we go. And okay, so he muted himself. I asked him to unmute. Mr. Howell, yes, there you go.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for listening to me. I'd like to start off by saying that I think this ought to be postponed for a better time when we can meet in person. It's hard to go through this process. There are a lot of people I know that wanted to join into this group.
Sir, can you
Yeah,
give us
this-
your address?
Oh, 7810 Clement Street in Camp Dennison, Ohio.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, I think this ought to be this whole thing should be postponed for a better time when we can get people to come in person. A lot of people wanted to join into this group for one reason or another, lack of experience of being on the computer, not wanting to, speak to a computer. It's kind of difficult for me right now too. But again, I think that should be first and foremost, postpone this and push this off to a later time. Next, I want to address a couple of things Brian brought up. Or let's start with what Todd, you mentioned how many people, or if Kim was an attorney, and I guess whether her what experience she had in drawing up a legal document like this. And I was wondering the same thing with anybody that's on this board or on this panel, who on here has that experience or authority to write a legal document.
I'll answer that question for the.
Well, I read the document, and I had a lot of issues with it, and I had questions with the putting in there about it being a issue of property value and safety for the trust or safety for the township, and it really wasn't anything about that. It's more about the property maintenance code. Again, it's like what the previous man was saying. But again, there's really nobody here that can draw this up. When Brian, when you were mentioning earlier about the fence being 90 degrees to what? You want to draw on some legal authority. Is that 90 degrees to the ground? If you're putting a fence on a hill, then it's not going to be 90 degrees to the ground. So where are we at with that? I mean, I think things like that. There's a lot of you're right. There is a lot of subjective language in here, and actually seeing two different documents. There was a whole lot of questions I had about the original document, which had the issue with the property values being mentioned in there is what the goal of this was. And that was all taken out and changed. There was a lot of subjective language taken out. So I'm not sure what document you guys are looking at and what I have looked at and what I've seen and that's been redone. So this thing is so liquid, it changes with somebody is making changes to this, and I'm not sure who has the authority to change that, but it changes in a heartbeat. I'd like to ask, what do people do? I know Brian, you said that this was there was language in the zoning code already about not having campers and trailers parked in driveways. And I guess people have campers and boats and trailers. I guess they're supposed to go lease a piece of storage facility and store their vehicles there. People have had campers. I see you shaking your head, George, but there are people down here shaking your head. Yes, you're acknowledging.
That's what a lot of people do, sir. I mean, that's what a lot of people do. They can afford.
I know that's what a lot of people do, but people in my community down
subdivision, I don't want to see a camper in my subdivision. So that's what the code says. That's what the code says.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and it's what I said is I live in a different subdivision than you. Things are a lot different down in this area than they are, I guess, where you live. And I guess it's a little more lenient here, and people do get away with other things. It's not as strict down here. We're talking about the gravel driveways, but when I talked to Kim, she said there's not been any complaints. I think Brian, you said that the issue was that you're dragging gravel out onto the road. I don't know if that makes it a safety issue or just a dirt issue or dust issue, but
both.
Kim said there's been no issues of accidents or complaints and anywhere at all in the township about gravel being drug out onto any roadway. I did submit a number of other questions to, I think it was Jason, the ICRC guy that administers. I don't have those questions in front of me. These are questions I've came up with just since the meeting started. I think I've got another list that I gave to him. I don't know if those will be gone through also, or do you want me to try to find those?
So if you send them to Jason with ICRC, he's not a member of the Township Zoning Commission or the township staff. He has nothing to do with this consideration.
Okay, but that's part of the problem I had, or somebody would have with this technology, is that we got an email saying, welcome to the thing, click here to start the session. And it said, send all your questions to Jason. And I assumed he meant questions pertaining to the issues at hand, not so much, maybe he was referring to questions about how this works. I'm not sure, but maybe it was a misunderstanding on my part. I can pull those questions up, I think, real quick. I'm assuming these amendments got started from the trustees. I think some of these questions have already been answered by Brian, at least to his satisfaction. Out of the complaints that come out of the township, is there a percentage that we have as to how many come out of HOAs? Is there complaints driven that's driving some of this, that somebody that already lives in an HOA that has more authority to have tighter restrictions, that is expecting the township to overstep something not being done to their satisfaction? Is any of that driven by this, or is there any record of that?
I wouldn't have it. It would have been complaints that would have gone to the township.
So there wouldn't be a separate a record that says, a record that says this came from an HOA. Okay, and when the previous Mr. Wolf mentioned that this was an end run around the property maintenance code, I do believe that it is also, because this seemed to pop up just as that went away. And again, I'll finish this up by saying I don't see why we're putting all this restrictions on such a few amount of complaints. You're wanting to tighten down the restrictions on everybody in the township, while we only have a few people that may be causing a problem. And I'll let that. And again, I'd like to mention one last time is that I think this ought to wait until we get where we can have in-person meetings and get everybody together face to face. And again, like I said, this is not a comfortable situation for me. But I felt it necessary to do this. But again, it's I think it ought to wait for a later time. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Howe.
Do I click leave?
No, sorry, Mr. Howell, I put you back in the attendees list.
I see two more.
Brian, can you tell us how many people have their hands up?
I see two.
Two, correct. There are two more. Mr. Wolf already spoke. You can decide, Mr. Kessler, if you want to allow him to speak again or not, but Carol Symmes is the next up that has not spoken yet.
Go ahead. Let's go with Ms. Symmes.
All right, let's see. Promote to panelists. There we go. All right. And Carol Symmes is now a member of the panel, can speak.
Welcome. If you could state your name and address for us, please.
Okay. Obviously, I'm not seeing myself on the screen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, I'm not Carol Symmes. I'm not sure if there's a way to turn the camera on, but
May I
anyway,
ask- Can you give us your name, sir?
absolutely. My name is Jim Meyer. I live at 9347 McKinney Road. We actually have a small gathering of residents here, so there is 4 of us that are going to talk. So including Carol Symmes. I'm on her computer. So the other people are Mark LeGuillen, and they'll give their addresses as they come up.
Sure.
CJ Carr and Carol Symmes. So anyway,
Hold on. Everybody that's there, you speak one at a time, and then when you're done, you're done. Turn it over to somebody else who has to introduce themselves.
yes,
Before they start speaking, please.
yeah, that's what our plan is.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Before we get started, we probably should have done this up front. We usually, when there's a number of people, invoke a 2-minute rule, and we certainly passed that substantially. So
No. I don't agree with that because other people have already gone well over that.
sir, you don't get to vote.
Okay, that's fine.
Go ahead and tell us what your
You've got
comment.
8 people. If you've got 4 people, that's 8 minutes.
Correct. Yeah, they're all residents, so thank you. All right, I'm going to start out. Apparently, you are not, first of all, the body language on this is wonderful. You guys clearly don't want to listen to the residents, not all of you, but several. I don't think many of you are familiar with the PMC the township tried to pass or was working on 5 years ago. There was over 9 revisions. The most recent revision was 27 pages. When they dropped it, it was last year during Phil Beck's re-election campaign. June 4th of 19, feel free to look this up on ICRC. It started at about an hour and a half. I got up there. I called CJ out, or Phil out on a number of issues about the property maintenance code. One of which was, I felt that it was an election year tactic to shelve the code. That it was just going to be reintroduced. Now it's reintroduced as a zoning amendment. In his response to me, he said, "We received more negative feedback on this whole topic than positive. There are areas of our township that have HOAs in effect, and that does the job for their neighborhood or their street. There are other areas that are not under an HOA that don't need a PMC." So farther down in his response, he said, "We basically kind of came to the collective realization that we are trying to solve something that doesn't need solving. So now they've dumped it in your lap and they want you to solve something that doesn't need solving." Again, look this up on ICRC June 4th of 19. It starts at about an hour and a half. I feel they are using you guys as pawns, wanting you to do their dirty work. I think due to the ambiguity of a lot of these text amendments, it is clearly going to result in litigation that will end up adding revision after revision to these text amendments. And then we're just going to end up with the whole PMC like we started, only it will be in you guys' lap. I will now hand it over to Mark LeGuillen.
Well, Mr. LeGuillen,
Yes, my name's Mark LeGuillen, longtime resident of the township,
your address, please.
9355 McKinney Road.
Thank you.
Obviously, everybody has read the zoning resolution or has read this evening. The real issues, setbacks, maintaining fences around pools are important. Those are real issues that hit zoning. I absolutely agree. But Section 3, 51.4 of the general provisions, basically the property maintenance code or the dump off, and the RV parking and the on-street parking of commercial vehicles, I'm concerned how the zoning can regulate parking on public streets. The entire section for the general provisions is vague, more vague, and not defined well at all, per your report. It is a huge overreach and contrary to the wishes of the majority of the township. As your staff reported and points out, a standalone PMC might be a better fit. If I were to put in your position by the trustees, I think I would feel the same way. I feel it's a serious problem. Many terms, as per your report, good condition, good repair, regular basis, timely manner, when needed, which would be hard to regulate and enforce, your own words. It would be subjective. Determinations are not clearly defensible and may cause legal action. It also points out problems with enforcement. The recommendation is PMC. This will be a problem, as the trustees have already said. The PMC is a dead issue. And they said to me personally, Mark, it's clear that the majority of the residents are opposed to the PMC. Now, anybody who portrays that any different than that, I will challenge. My biggest concern, as it was pointed out, is enforcement becomes very difficult because it's so vague and it's hard to regulate. I believe this vagueness begs for litigation. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees. Whatever it is, as a taxpayer, I don't want to pay any portion of that. And this terrible language pushes that. Many of our residents enjoy outdoor activities and their options. Many of our residents enjoy outdoor activities. Limiting their options by controlling where they park their RVs is an issue. As individual problems do arise in a lot of these areas, the township trustees are well within their authority and their bounds to call something a nuisance, put it on paper, and deal with them individually, because the problem is not that large. There are many mechanisms. With the dissent of your staff report being so vague, has our law director weighed in on it? It strikes me that this resolution is not an appropriate place to resolve these issues. I think at a minimum, your recommendation should be to eliminate Section 3, the 51.5, and Section 143 on the RVs and the parking of commercial vehicles. Now I get to the really important stuff. With the COVID-19, many of our neighbors are not able to participate. The reasonable thing to do is to delay this until all residents can participate. This is not essential and should be delayed. I'm very close to my end. I would recommend at a minimum 51.5 and 43.4 be excluded from the text amendment as problems are clear. About complaints, as somebody addressed earlier, there is a very small number of complaints. And I took a 4-year period, and on the worst year, there were confirmed 37 complaints that were valid complaints. Took the voting residents of the township. Simple math is 0.003% of the population filed a complaint. That's in previous testimony to the trustees in earlier meetings. In regards to the PMC, the final number of the emails that were received by the trustees, and I can't be exact, but I believe the ending total numbers were 57 were for the PMC and 150 emails were opposed. Now, not that that's nothing. I realize issues have come up and they have to be addressed. The township does have the mechanisms to deem a problem nuisance and deal with it.
All right. Mr. LeGuardia, I appreciate your comments. Can we hear from the other two people at the
Sure, we'll move right along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please state your name and address, please.
CJ Carr, 10403 Willow Drive, Loveland 45140. I'd like to start off. Go ahead.
The floor is yours.
Okay. I'd like to start off again, like it was said before. I know many neighbors that want to come to the meeting. With this COVID-19, this is one issue that's not a top of line issue that has to be done to deal with times or anything, and these meetings should be postponed until it's a time that neighbors can show up and voice their opinions in person. Section 2 talks about adding a sidewalk requirement. How can a developer be required to put sidewalks on both sides of a street? And again, getting into vague, a lot of this stuff is very vague. Some streets don't have right-of-ways. Some properties still go to the center lines of the street. So is a development going to be turned down because a developer can't gain access to the other side of the street? Why would the township want to give up them being able to make comments on these reports like Brian Snyder reported before? If Section 2 is approved, the township or county has no say in it. It follows this regulation. Section 3 talks about general maintenance of property, maintenance code or HOA regulations. It's been called multiple things. It's vague, poorly written, and not wanted by a majority of the township residents. The staff report even states that it's better as a standalone property maintenance code. Staff report says zoning is authorized in Ohio for protection of health, safety, general welfare of the residents, but not to improve property values or enhance the quality of life. And these references should be removed from the proposed text from this section. The residents by majority don't want a property general maintenance code. The county zoning department, the department that's going to be responsible for enforcement of this, is already saying that they don't know if they can enforce it. It should be removed from the proposed text amendment. Section 10, residential parking. I've had discussions with the township administrator on this issue a couple of times. The driveway setback issue is, from what I understand, being water runoff from one property to the next. There is that issue in some properties. The wording is too restrictive in some cases. Side entry garage that was noted, rear entry garage. Lots that don't have square corners. Trying to run driveways, we're going to have to go with circular driveways to get out of these houses and garages. Drainage is the real issue. Wording about drainage is what should be put into a code, not where a driveway, sidewalk, or patio should be, because any solid surface is going to drain water onto a neighbor's property. Getting into the driveway issue with gravel, at least in our neighborhood, and I know in some neighborhoods where we don't have curb and gutter, after the roads are paved, the township comes in and berms the sides of roads with gravel. We got more gravel on our streets from them berming than anybody's driveway in the neighborhood here. So maybe berming should be part of the code too, that they don't berm our streets anymore. One thing that Brian didn't address in section 10 was no commercial vehicles or trailers shall be permitted to park on any public street. Again, the wording of it, has there been an opinion from the law director on the township or zoning regulations who can and cannot park on a public street? How can the township regulate who's parking on the street? The last time I checked, UPS, FedEx, Amazon, lawn services, etc., they have commercial vehicles. They park in front of your house. The wording says no commercial vehicles parking. Section 11, again, with the RVs and the trailers, the law director should weigh in on this. Does the township zoning have authority to regulate parking on a public street? Zoning certificates within 1 year. I'm a builder, that's acceptable. What if this job, though, takes longer than 1 year? Again, the wording's vague. In 1 year, the zoning certificate expires. Does it need to be renewed, or should other wording be put in there? The fences from fire plugs, yeah, that's a major issue. But the other electrical, telephone, stuff like that really doesn't pertain too often. Some of the text amendment changes are poorly written, far-reaching, and unenforceable in some cases. I cannot understand how the staff report recommends approval of this case when they have so many objections in their report. Item by item should be removed as stated by the staff report in those sections. Again, none of those issues in the text amendment need to be changed now or at this time during this pandemic. There is no pressing time issue to have to move forward on this right now. At the very least, follow the recommendations of the staff report per item and delete the sections the staff, the experts in this text amendment change have noted to be deleted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeGuillen.
So much for you, Mr. Carr.
Hi, I'm Carol Symmes. I live at 9972 Washington Street down in Camp Dennison. And after listening to the staff report and some of the I do believe, I do not believe, in the comments from the residents, I'm probably as confused as all of you are as to why we're even talking about these proposed text amendments. The text amendments were initiated by the township, by the trustees, and will undoubtedly be approved. However they come to them, they're going to approve this text amendments. Why are these even being proposed? Nobody really can say. And that's why we're here tonight. All the residents are here tonight is because you are the ones who can protect us residents from some of these text amendments. I have a very much prepared statement. I'm not going to read it because sidewalks, section 51.4 sidewalks have been addressed by many. What hasn't been mentioned is that the county has, in their subdivision policy, has a requirement the sidewalks go into major subdivisions. The township has adopted a resolution to require them in the minor subdivisions. So why are we putting this now into this zoning amendment, which staff says is going to increase the amount of money townships paying for zoning? Therefore, I'm asking you to remove this section entirely from the proposed text amendment. 51.5, general maintenance. It is definitely a way for the trustees to backdoor the residents into having a property maintenance code. Whether you want to call it backdoor or whatever it is, we were told it's a dead issue. We fought it to make it a dead issue. We will fight to make this a dead issue. Again, I am asking you to remove this section from the proposed text amendment. Third, 143.3 is an issue regarding gravel driveways. What I didn't hear from staff in the staff report, when you mentioned it, Brian, is the very last sentence that you have. Staff recommends removing this from the proposed regulations. Again, please remove this section from the proposed text amendments. Section 143.4 is dealing with your stuff in the right-of-way. Again, zoning does not regulate right-of-way. Why is this section in it? It needs to be removed. Section 346, fences. Staff again is saying they have concerns about ensuring compliance. If we can't ensure compliance of it, why is it in the zoning code? Remove this section entirely. But my major concern, which has not been addressed by anybody, is the section regarding permitting variable message centers on signs in residential districts. As you all know, we have a conditional use section within the zoning code. And this conditional use section regulates churches, nonprofit organizations, swim clubs, tennis clubs, schools, parks, golf courses, public buildings, everything that's being mentioned within this section, okay? The process is for those uses to come before the Board of Zoning Appeals. And there is specific criteria and stuff that they have to follow. One of them is signage. For example, a church or library is permitted one sign at a maximum of 12 square feet. A recreation cultural facility, such as a golf course, swim club, or a government-owned facility is permitted one sign at a max of 32 square feet. Why are we putting something within the signage section that's going to contradict what's in the conditional use section? You're taking away the ability of the Board of Zoning Appeals to protect the residents from this kind of use being going into a major residential district. So remove this. Don't allow them to be able just to get a permit because you now have this within your signage regulations. I do have a question for Brian. The board, if I remember right, Zoning Commission has three options. They can approve it as presented, they can approve it as modified, or they can recommend denial to the Board of Trustees. If they recommend denial or if they recommend modification, what is the vote that's required by the trustees in order to pass these text amendments?
Simple majority.
I believe it's all three has to move. You might want to check that.
I did. It got changed 10 years ago by the Ohio Revised Code. The state legislature changed that requirement from 3-0 to 2-1. Okay,
so then hopefully the Zoning Commission is going to help protect us. There's been so many concerns that have been addressed. Your own staff report says there's concerns, that this stuff. And now just going through and saying, okay, this is how we're going to modify it, does not give us residents a chance to say to you, even the way you're modifying it does not work for us, okay? You can continue this. You can continue this until everybody can come before you in person and we can talk to you and everything. There's stuff being added that's, to me, is a direct contradiction to what was promised by the trustees, and it should give you pause. If it's not important in your decision-making tonight, I would like to read just a small portion of a letter received by the trustees from Dave Yates, who's the Ohio Attorney General. This letter was in reference to how Ohio's Open Meetings Act replies to periods of this time. He made the following comment in part. As a final word of unsolicited non-legal advice, please note that the procedure outlined in this letter is to address the unique situation that all Ohio is dealing with. Now is not the time to rely on this guidance in order to enact legislation unrelated to the instant emergency that is better reserved for the normal operations of government. For example, the passage of a new tax levy, or to enact a new regulatory scheme. Let me repeat that one section again. Now is not the time to enact any legislation such as a new text amendment. The minor changes that are in here, about 3 and 5 feet, can be handled by an administrative opinion, and the remaining sections should not even be considered. There is no sound justification why this text amendment should not be continued or denied completely in better reserve for the normal operations of the government. I have one last comment. Please remember, this legislation is subject to referendum if it's adopted by the board. We hope that you take all our considerations and all the comments made by residents into consideration, and that we can count on you to help protect us. That's all I have. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Brian, is there anyone else that has not spoken?
No, we have Stephen Wolf, who spoke previously. He has his hand up, but it's up to you.
No, we've heard from every resident has had an opportunity to talk that wants to talk. So I'm going to decline the additional comments or questions from Mr. Wolf and close the public portion of the hearing and have discussion among the panel.
If I could, before you get into that, there are some issues that were raised that I'd like to clarify, just to the commission. All of the RV being parked on the street, I did bring that up in the staff report for commercial vehicles and RVs being parked in the right of way. However, I did go to great lengths to point out that there's no law that I know of that I can point to that prevents the township from doing this. Somebody asked if the amendments were reviewed by the law director, and yes, they were. The township law director did review these and did not raise an issue with that particular requirement. And again, it's easily enforceable if it's parked in the street. Our zoning inspector can see that it's parked in the street. So there's a legal question, like I said, just based on the way that I was taught how to administer zoning, but that doesn't mean that it's not legal or that it's illegal just because that's what I've always heard. Additionally, along those lines, I've only administered zoning for the last 10 years. I've worked in zoning for 20 years. Typical attorneys don't write zoning code. There are some consultants that do. However, Kim Lepensi is the administrator of the township. She was previously a zoning administrator. I'm sure that she's written numerous text amendments to zoning codes previously. I'm sure that she's worked with a number of law directors, as I have, on what is legal and what's not legal in zoning. There is no such thing necessarily as a 100% zoning expert. You don't go to school and learn how to write zoning code. It's something that you're self-taught for. The fact that none of you on the board are lawyers is kind of the point. You're residents who were appointed by the trustees to serve in this role. So there's not an issue with that. And I don't see why there would be any issue with either my review of the amendments or Kim's preparing of the amendments at the direction of the trustees. So
he's got a lot of stuff.
We do have that. And just one last point. The let's see, changes to the text that went through the process. Somebody mentioned like that the text has changed and doesn't know what the text is. This text was initiated by a resolution of the Symmes Township trustees. I can guarantee you that the township resolution that they passed did not change. Whoever was making that accusation probably was talking about some of the things he had from when they were doing a property maintenance code review. And those things I'm sure have changed. But since they were initiated by the trustees, that was done by a resolution of the trustees, and I'm sure that it has not changed. That language is the same. It's what they initiated. That's what is before you in your packet tonight. What we're talking about as far as the property maintenance section of the proposed text amendments is not a property maintenance code. Obviously, everybody, I'm just assuming on the board, knows what a property maintenance code is. This would not be it. These are property maintenance issues that would be added to the zoning resolution. It's not a property maintenance code being stuck into the zoning resolution. I already did say that the law director reviewed these things. Let's see, sidewalks. Mr. Carr, I believe, brought up sidewalks being required on both sides of the street. That would be up to the developer on each side of the street. Only the lot that you own would be something that you would be required to put sidewalks on. You would not be required, no developer would be required to put sidewalks on somebody else's lot across the street. That would apply to each individual property owner, developer, builder, whatever, on their individual lot that they were building at the time that they were building. The driveway gravel and the boat and RV parking are currently in the code. As I said, right now, you're not allowed to pave your driveway with gravel. That would not change. It would be further clarified by the amendment. And I did not suggest that that section be removed from the text. That section, I believe the finding said, was an improvement and a clarification to the requirement for paved driveways. So we do favor further clarifying that gravel is not permitted to be used as a driveway surface, but that's not a change. If you build a house right now, you're not allowed to build a gravel driveway. So this isn't an amendment. And the same with RVs. If you have an RV, currently you're not allowed to park it in your driveway. You're not allowed to store it in your side yard. You're not allowed to park it on your grass or on your pavement. So that's also not a change. If you have an RV, you'd be able to park it everywhere you normally could. People who park their RVs in the street are, I believe, currently hearing from the sheriff's department sometimes and sometimes not. And there's some inconsistency with the enforcement through the sheriff's department, which I believe is the reason that the township is interested in adding it to the zoning code, where enforcement can be through one person consistently, more so than what the sheriff is providing. But still, you're not allowed to, I don't believe, park your RV in the public street without hearing from the sheriff's office at some point in time. So again, I don't believe that any of those are big changes. They're the things that already exist. All of the requirements are already there. So I just wanted to make that clear that those things aren't being changed. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. One, I don't know about the rest of my colleagues on this panel, but I was not aware of the extent of discussion about the property maintenance plan at the trustee level that has already taken place. Two, I think we should incorporate the changes recommended by the staff into the resolution so we can understand exactly what we're looking at potentially proposing, and that includes taking the maintenance thing out. And three, I agree with the public comments that there's nothing wrong with delaying this process.
Well, my question related to that delay is, are we holding or not holding trustee meetings?
They are holding them.
Okay. Secondly, I don't believe, have you gone into, we have not talked about the detail of your recommended revisions, have we not?
No, we haven't.
So I would like to hear your recommended revisions before we vote on anything, whether that's a delay or whether that's approval or whether that's denial or that we approve with your recommended revisions.
Before we get into the recommended provisions, can we first have comment about whether everybody thinks that delay should occur? I feel strongly with the public that delay should occur until this can be held public.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on that as well, but I want something in front of me that I can look at with definitive language and agree or disagree with. So to the extent that we delay, it provides an opportunity to incorporate everything into one document we can look at.
Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is only a recommendation.
I know.
Is what we do. This is not the end of the deal here. It goes back to the trustees at another public meeting, of which there will be further public comments, and the trustees can then at that point take our recommendation. They can change our what we've approved or recommend for approval, or our recommendation. They could throw it out the window, and they could do whatever they want to a certain extent.
Or if we disapprove, they can ignore that.
That's exactly correct.
I understand. Brian, did you want to provide specifics, or would the rest of the panel even get to that?
Prior to Brian doing that, I would go back to what I said previously, and James or somebody else said, I'd like to see it in writing, what's being proposed, not be talking about this conceptually.
I agree with that. I think we delay and then ask Brian to come back with the actual language.
Then we know what we're talking about.
Brian, what did the planning commission approve then?
So the planning commission had this discussion, but because it was a recommendation, and because I informed them that I felt like after talking to Kim that there was language that could get the text amendments to a point where it addressed the main issues that the township was concerned about, while addressing the concerns that staff had in the staff report, I felt there was a compromise that we could reach. And it's the amendments that I would present, but I can put them in writing and give them to you at a future date, but or we can do it tonight. It's up to you. It's up to you. But I told the planning commission that, and they said they recommended with the added caveat that the text amendments be modified to address the staff concerns. So their official motion was to recommend approval with changes to address the staff concerns from the staff report.
And we're under no time frames that it automatically will just go to the trustees.
No, so the way that the process works is it comes to you for a public hearing, and you do, as the zoning commission, have the authority to continue the hearing for any just cause, like you want more information. And you can do that. The trustees, I don't believe, would have set their hearing until after you act, just because of the fact that you have the authority to continue.
And then when it gets to the board of trustees, that would be a public hearing also, or would it be?
It would be a public hearing, yes.
Okay.
I have to say, without seeing the actual language, I would be inclined to vote against recommending this.
I guess one clarification on that, it's one thing to vote against, and if we vote against and agree on that, it's going to go to the trustees and they can do with it with whatever they want. Whereas if we vote to continue, it's still under our jurisdiction, so to speak. Is that right, Brian?
Well, it's their jurisdiction for sure. But it would, if the option was to either deny it flat out or for me to prepare the changes that I'm suggesting in a document that you can see the changes, then I would suggest doing that.
Okay.
Yeah,
what gets presented to the board then? What we recommend, or what was originally proposed?
All of it. They see all of the materials up to this point. So they know what they initiated it, so they know what it started out as. They see the minutes of the planning commission. I report the planning commission's vote. They see the staff report, and then I report the zoning commission's vote, and any changes that you have as the zoning commission, and then they have all that information when they make their decision. In addition to all the comments from the residents that attend the trustees meeting as well.
So I'll make a motion that we postpone the vote until such time that staff can put in writing the specific revisions for section so that we can review it at the next meeting and then have another conversation about it and vote on that.
I'll second that motion.
So let's see, Jen, are you still there or not there? I mean,
I think she's like not listening.
all right, we'll just assume that she's having technical difficulties. So we had a motion by Mr. Flynn.
Correct.
So your motion, and I believe Mr. Singler, you seconded that motion?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so let me clarify what Mr. Flynn's motion was briefly. You want to continue this hearing till the next zoning commission meeting, which would be the third Wednesday of next month. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'd like to see in writing your suggested revisions to the code.
Sure. The date of that meeting is August 19th.
I'd like to motion to amend that motion that we continue the hearing until in-person proceedings can be held.
So that would assume, well, that leaves it very open.
That could be 2022, to be honest with you. And
I don't
understand that.
Jim, the fact that they are holding public hearings at the trustee level now, why does that make a difference for our board?
I think that there's a lot of people who felt like they wanted to appear in front of us and voice their opinions that weren't able to do so.
Well, I think that's, and with all due respect, I believe that's hearsay because you just heard a couple of people mention that. The reality of it is we're going through the same procedures. We're just, we're giving the notices and we're allowing people to come in from an electronic version. I do understand that there are some people that's limiting for them. But again, we're holding township trustee meetings, which are a little more elevated in importance than our meetings, frankly. And I think we are really a recommendation board is what it's really going to come down to. And we have heard from a few people tonight. Maybe we'll hear from more people in the next meeting. But the reality of it is who knows when this could ever go back to where, we hold these. This could be something that we do going forward forever, to be honest with you, that we don't hold public hearings or public meetings anymore. I don't know. And at some point, I think we should address this thing and not keep kicking the can personally. That's just my opinion.
So what motion is currently before us, or motions?
I believe it was to continue the public hearing till the August 19th meeting, but Mr. Singler's proposal was to.
I'm withdrawing my second and I'm withdrawing my amendment to the motion.
Okay, so now there's just a motion on the floor to continue to the August 19th meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you ready?
Yes, if you could take a vote.
Okay, Mr. Etter,
Yes.
Mr. Singler,
No.
Mr. Flynn,
Yes.
Ms. Bucco,
Yes.
Mr. Kessler.
Yes.
So that's a 4-1. That motion passes. The public hearing is continued until August 19th.
That ends
public hearings.
That ends the public hearing portion. Do we continue on with the other matters with other people removed, or is?
I believe that all we have now are the panelists, so I think we're good to move forward, yes.
Quick
All right.
question about the August 19th or August 19th meeting. Obviously, we would get more information based on our vote. You would provide us with a revised proposed resolution, but depending on what's going on in the world of COVID and everything else, we don't have to push it forward at that time, do we? I mean, we could then at that defer depending on what's going on.
Correct, yes.
Okay,
We could defer it till September if we feel necessary at that point.
But that's something we have to do at the meeting as opposed to prior to the meeting, correct?
I believe so, because we've announced it at this meeting and there's a number of attendees interested in that. So I believe that we would have to have this meeting again to continue it further.
Okay. Brian, at the bottom of my screen, I see 2 hands up, or I don't know who those individuals are, or if they pertain to what's forthcoming.
I'm not sure who. Michael Howell already spoke, I believe.
And then there's an Andrea Barnhill.
Which I thought she spoke earlier about the previous case, but maybe she did not.
Okay.
We've
Well,
taken a motion to continue the hearing already, so it's up to you if you want to add her and ask her what she would like to speak about. Or move on.
move on. Old business, looks like none. New business, none. Administrative matters, none. Any other comments?
No, none for me.
In that case, motion to adjourn.
I'll
So-
motion, we adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you especially, Brian, for your technical assistance.
Good to see everybody.
No problem.
Healthy.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.